Frustrated you can't get the same clarity and punch as the records you love no matter what you try? In this video, I'm pulling back the curtain on a dead simple trick that's baked into the world's biggest mixes that unlocks that clarity and punch you've been after. And to take what you'll discover in this video and start pumping out mixes people blow up your DMs over, I made you a cheat sheet I probably shouldn't be giving away. It's called the Mix Decoder Cheat Sheet. It's your unfair shortcut to unlocking mixes that sit shoulder to shoulder with the ones that have inspired you and make people stop and ask how the hell you're doing it. So when I first started producing records out of my parents' spare den about 2 decades ago, I thought back then that mixing was all about mastering how to fit all the tracks into the mix like pieces of a puzzle. That's what we're all taught. And somehow the more I EQ'd for clarity and separation, the worse it sounded. It wasn't punchy, it wasn't clear, it wasn't glue, it was just infuriating and frustrating. And even after blowing 30K on audio school, I was still getting thin, brittle, lifeless mixes and wondering what the hell I was doing wrong. Everything changed when I got a front row seat on major label sessions working inside the world's largest online school for rock and metal producers, and then later learning directly from my mentor, Beau Burchell. And here's the kicker. No one tells us the truth. Pros have been cheating using a subtle technique that's been shaping records for nearly a century. See, the pros know that relying on static EQ alone is like bringing a butter knife to a lightsaber battle, especially in 200 plus track sessions. And after nearly 2 decades of producing and teaching, I've collected a stack of powerful ways to tap into this powerful technique that will instantly give your mixes the separation and clarity you've been after. But before I show you how to actually use these methods pros rely on, we need to step back and break down how the technique of sidechaining really works, beyond the usual tricks everyone talks about. Because once you understand what's happening under the hood, you'll start hearing opportunities to use it in your mix everywhere. Now, there are 2 core types of sidechaining, and each one unlocks a different kind of control. So sometimes a plugin doesn't respond to everything in the signal, just one part. Take a de-esser. It doesn't squash the whole vocal, just the S sounds. It listens for a narrow frequency and then ducks only that. Now, some compressors like the Distressor, for example, have bandpass filters that are built into the detection path. That means that boosted frequency will change how the compressor's behavior reacts. Another example of this is multiband compressors. They do a similar thing, but split across multiple frequency zones that react independently. But it's not just about dynamics. So if you picked up on the pattern, all of these plugins are reacting to themselves. They're listening to their own internal input and making decisions internally without any help from another track. This style of processing could be referred to as internal sidechaining. Then sometimes the plugin just isn't reacting to itself. It's reacting to something else. A totally different sound that steps in and says, hey, when I hit, you move. One sound becomes the trigger, the other becomes the responder. And this creates a sort of conversation that happens within the mix. This is called external sidechaining, and it's where the real magic happens. And this kind of move is what most producers actually mean when they talk about sidechaining. Now, sidechaining can show up in 3 powerful flavors, each unlocking a different way to control space, energy, and emotion in your tracks. Now, you've definitely heard about this version of sidechaining. The kick hits and the bass dips for a second. This is dynamic sidechaining. It's like automating the bass to go down in volume when the kick punches, except you don't have to automate a thing. But sometimes you don't want to duck the whole sound, just the part that's in the way. Like when a vocal and a synth are fighting in the same frequency zone, you don't want to mute the synth. You just want to back off where the vocal is shining. So imagine the power of being able to dim the amount of frequency information that's in that synth in that particular space. This is called frequency-based sidechain. No harsh EQ cuts, no overcompression, just clean automatic clarity. Now imagine this. You've got a plugin that can zoom in on your audio like a microscope. It analyzes the signal, pinpoints exactly what's clashing, and subtracts only those tiny pieces with 0 damage to the rest. It's extremely surgical. Sometimes using this type of processing, you won't even feel like you're hearing it working, but you can feel the clarity. And once you experience what this can do in a mix, you'll wonder how you ever mixed without it. This is called spectral sidechaining, and it's the most precise, transparent way to clean up a mix without leaving any artifact fingerprints. Now here's the wild part. The technique that pros have been using for almost a century originally started as just dynamic sidechaining. But when you stack all these types of sidechaining together in a mix, you unlock mixes that feel controlled, clean, and will connect with the listener more emotionally. Now let me show you several ways to bring all these different techniques together and make them work for you. So before we get started in Cubase with all the sidechaining and everything that I have set up, I want to first mention two things. The first being that with sidechaining, we can do it via audio, and the second being we can do it via MIDI. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm only going to be focusing on triggering sidechaining via internal and audio and not MIDI. Now, with that said, looking at the Cubase session, we have a few things going on. Now, the first thing I want to focus on is the mix bus. And what I have going on in the mix bus is some sidechaining. And with this particular sidechain, the way I have it set up is I'm using a plugin called SpecCraft from 3Body Technology. It is probably my favorite spectral EQ analyzer type plugin that removes frequencies via spectral analysis. Now, I like using this to send my vocals from the vocal bus to this plugin so that it is spectrally ducking the mix where the vocals are coming up so that the vocals can be a little bit more upfront, but I'm not doing it too much because I don't want it to really weigh down on the entire mix. Now, right now, the vocals aren't playing, so this will not be doing anything, so we're just going to keep moving forward. Next, we have the band bus. Now, the band bus has all the drums, bass, and guitars going to this particular bus because I want to affect it a little bit differently, and this is before the mix bus. Now, on this particular track, what I have going on are two instances of another 3Body Technology compressor. You can use any compressor that has sidechain to it. I prefer this one because I can go through modes really quickly here, and I have a lot of different nerdy options that I enjoy that 3Body Technology has in their plugins. Now here I have the kick being sent to the band bus, and what's happening is every time the kick hits, the band bus is ducking a little bit as well so that there's movement happening to all the instruments in the band. So I'm going to start with it off and then turn it on. You can hear that the kick just has a little bit more punch and it's pushing forward a little bit. And I have a fairly fast release and a little bit slower of an attack. Now, right below, we have another compressor. This time I'm sidechaining from a snare trigger. And every time the snare hits, the same thing's happening. There's a little bit of ducking happening, movement, pumping. And I have a little bit slower release, so the snare sustain kind of rests a little bit. So you get a little bit of a bounce between the kick and the snare on the band bus. And let's bypass and bring it in. Now on the drums, I'm not doing anything, but on the drum shells, I am doing something that we're going to talk about now. And it's utilizing a plugin called M-Auto Align that's taking care of something very scary to a lot of beginning engineers, and it's taking care of the phase and polarity alignment. Now, if you're not familiar with those terms, it's beyond the scope of this video, but all it is that little phase switch that you see on a lot of plugins. It's doing that, but at a much higher level, and it's also making sure that the distance between sources are all within cohesion as well. Sounds scary. It's not as scary, but this plugin takes all the scariness away and does it really quickly. And one reason I really enjoy it is because it has internal sidechaining to listen to all the instances at the same time, and then you can bypass them all within one plugin. So you go and you insert this plugin on all your drum tracks. The way I like to do it is on my overheads and then all my shells. You press play, you hit analyze, and it fixes it. And if you want to see it happening in real time, I'll hit analyze. But yeah, bypass. Still sounds great. Now there's some more forwardness in the kick. It's more abrasive, it's more front. The snare has more attack to it. So this is using eternal sidechaining communication with all the plugins to align everything. Now from there, I have one of my favorite plugins for gating, and that is Neutron. Now, one reason I like Neutron is because the gate section isn't just one full band gate. You can break it up into different sections like you can see now, which allows me to have the internal sidechain of the snare, hi-hat, and ride, which were the mics that I could kind of hear in the track. And then with those sidechains set up, I can go through each band and kind of fine tune the gate per band as opposed to just one full band. So it gives me a little bit more punch out of each drum. So let me see if we can hear a difference between the kick drum turning it on and off. And I have the same thing happening on these other kick drums. So I'm just going to turn those on. Now, let's talk about the snare top. Same thing's happening. I'm using another case of Neutron for the gate. This time I have the hi-hat and the ride side chaining so that I get a better sound out of that. I have the same thing going on over here at the snare bottom. Now, something that I'm doing for the snare top that's a little bit different is I'm using Pro MB in the expansion setting, and I'm using its internal sidechain, FreeBand, and I'm using it to find the frequencies where the attack of the snare are. And what's happening is every time a snare hits, it opens up this little part of the window. And then when the snare hit goes away, it closes, so we get less hi-hat bleed. And I'll turn that on and off. Now we're gonna go to toms. So I have the gate going and it's being triggered off the snare bottom for all the toms, but I'm doing something interesting on this tom bus over here. So let's bring this up. I'm using another cool plugin from 3Body Technology. It's called Trinity Shaper. Now, this one is a multi-transient plugin, and I love transient shapers. They're amazing. They're the best. I cannot recommend them enough, especially on drums. They change the whole game, and you can rely on less compression when used appropriately. Something that you can do that's pretty cool with toms is that you can sidechain the bass to the toms so that every time the bass plays, you get a little bit more attack and body out of the toms when they're hit if the bass is playing. We're not affecting it frequency or dynamic wise. We're only affecting it transient wise. And because we have multi-band mode, I can go over here and adjust the crossovers and get it really fine-tuned to where I want the attack in the body of whatever drum hit is happening. And when I click down here, you can see external sidechains on, and I'm filtering out some lows and some highs, and then boosting a little bit in the body of where the bass crunch is at. So when the bass crunch is really happening, this is pushing the transient of the toms when they're playing in that section a little bit more. All right, cymbals. Now I'm doing the same Pro MB trick over here, but I have an expander at the bottom low end. So all I really want is the mid range of the hi-hat and rise, which is something I like doing. I like not boosting the top end or removing it, but kind of taming the top end, but relying more on the mids for the body of the hi-hat and the ride. So this is allowing me to have the mid range of the hi-hats, but then dampen the low end and the top end, and only allow the top end to expand when the hi-hat is hit or the ride is hit. And again, I'm using the internal sidechain FreeBand to allow this to happen. And I have it set up on both of these bands right here, as you can see. So the blue one's over here and the purple one's over here. And let's turn both of those on. Now, cymbals. So cymbals are all my overheads and rooms. They all go to this bus right here. And what I have going on is this instance of Neutron's Unmask, which I really like. It is an overpowered, amazing plugin. And I have my main guitars being sent to this because what Unmask is doing is unmasking the frequencies. And all I wanted to do is remove frequencies that are slightly fighting with my main guitars in the cymbals, whether it's the rooms, the overheads, or the spot mics. Just slightly. This is barely kissing it. I don't want it to do too much. I just want it to make room so when those guitars are playing, those cymbals just come down a little bit and I don't have to fight it with too much automation in the mix. But underneath that, I am doing a cool side chaining trick. I'm setting the main guitars as well to this plugin. Now, this is one of the most underrated, coolest plugins on the planet, and I wish more people embraced it because it is awesome once you get your head around it. You're able to pick the key of the song, and then from there, engage this sidechain, and I have my main guitars going to it. From there, when I do these deductions, I am not reducing frequencies that are in the key of the song, essentially. I'm removing frequencies that are out of key of the song, but I am also sidechaining it so that when the guitars play, I'm only removing signals that are outside of the key of the guitars and the song. So it doesn't really affect the cymbals too much, and it just opens up the clarity of the cymbals because the guitars are removing some of the out of key frequencies from the cymbals as well. It's a really cool way to do it. And then from there on the overheads, I'm doing a trick that I like doing to even out the middle poke of the snare and overhead sometimes is using this Schoeps de-esser. You can do this a bunch of different ways. For me, it's easiest doing it this way because I have the option of doing stereo or NS really quickly within one plugin. And I don't really want to compress or EQ out the frequencies. I just want to like softenly push it back. And that's what a de-esser does in my brain. So I have the sidechain of the snare coming to this track. And then I went through and I listened to where the attack was at and where the body was at. And I'm just having it barely bring down the snare body and attack in those overheads when they hit. And it's very, very subtle. And by doing that, I get more forwardness from the kick and the snare, which is really, really lovely. I have two more things for the drums. And then the rooms get all the room tracks. And what I have is another instance of this 3-body technology compressor. And I am sending the snare trigger to it. And what I want for the rooms is that every time the snare hits, I kind of want a little bit of pumping from the main snare to hit and the rooms kind of go down, but then come back up. So you get this like really like roomy push that you do with parallel compression. But I'm using audio sidechain to kind of get it from the group, but it's not too heavy-handed. Now, one other cool trick that I like doing is I like using this McDSP plugin, and I am sidechaining the snare. And what I'm doing is I'm using a different type of compression that you may not be familiar with or have heard of, but it's really cool on room mics. It's called negative compression. So this is our slope, right, of our compression as it goes this way. That's our knee and all that stuff, but this is the slope right now. So if we were to go up in ratio, this is where the knee happens, and then the audio comes up, and then we have our like 4-to-1, 3-to-1, all that stuff. Negative compression, it's going to get gnarly right now. There we go. See how it ducks? It's basically bringing things down after it hits a certain threshold, and then it's bringing it back up. So you get this really cool boom type sound from the compression. And shamelessly enough, I did a WAV certificate class ages ago, and I got this plugin from doing it, and we had to learn about negative compression then, which is really sick. But the way I was shown how to use it was on like mono room tracks and just anything you want more explosiveness out of your snare drum. So I'm sidechaining the snare trigger to this room. I have feed forward and feedback as an option, which is why I like this compressor, is I can bounce between the two. Feed forward and feedback compression are two different sounds, but I also have the normal and negative in all my other ratios. And this is based on a 78 FET style compressor, so it gives me that FET style compression that I would want. So this is just negative compression without the sidechain. With that snare trigger, now it's like breathing with the track more. And I can bring that in again. And if you want to know more about compression, all that nerdy stuff, I have stuff in my compression cheat sheet that I'll link below also as well. All right, so now let's talk about some of the plugins I have going on. So with snares, you always need like a snare reverb, and I have this Aurora from iZotope. The reason I'm going with this one is it was a lot more streamlined and easier for demonstration reasons, but it is also doing sidechaining. This time it's unmasking, meaning it's listening to the source that's coming in, and it is unmasking frequencies that might get in the way. So this is your form of like ducking that would be used by a gate or a compressor, but it has it built in, and this is doing more spectral analysis to remove those offending frequencies from being in the way of the main impact of the snare drum in this case. So I went with this plugin just because that was already built in, as you're going to see with a couple of other ones. Next, I have one of my favorite reverbs of all time. It's called Seventh Heaven. Now, one reason I like this particular reverb is we have this ducker section, and once it's on, you can select kind of how you want it to work. But what I really like is that it will only affect like the late reverb tails, or you can have it affect the entire thing, but it's listening to the incoming signal, in this case, the snare also, and then it is ducking it out of the way when that main snare hits and then bringing it back up. So you're not getting a very muddy mix. And it also has EQ, so you can really fine tune how that's working, but I was only concerned about having the ducker, which I use all the time. And then I have the same thing going on this reverb. So we got some sick sidechaining happening on our drums, our band bus, and our mix bus. Let's talk about bass. There's a common technique using track spacer. All I'm doing is sending the kick drum, and the kick drum is ducking the bass, and then you can use this filter to basically adjust. So what I like to do is while the track is playing, I will bring this down until I like lose a little bit of the umph from the kick, and then back it up until I get more of that umph from the kick back in the bass track from its sidechaining. You'll hear it. It's a really, really sensitive spot. If you have too much of it, it doesn't really sound right. And if you have too little of it, it just kind of sounds choked. So it's like just moving it very, very ever so slightly. It sounds clean. Let me turn this on too. Now, underneath that, I have sidechaining from the snare coming to this instance of Neutron's Unmasked. And this time, every time the snare hits, it's going to bring down the masking frequencies in the bass guitar. Now, you could do both of these with compression if you wanted to, send the kick to a compressor and the snare to a compressor. I didn't want too much movement in this particular song. It's a pop punk song, so I really just wanted to clean up frequencies more than anything. I didn't want to create pumping that using a compressor would do in this case. Some more of that snare's coming out. Now another one. So earlier we had talked about how we were sidechaining the bass to the toms. Now we are sidechaining the toms to the bass. So when the toms hit also, it's ducking out certain frequencies of the bass so that it plays nicer together. And I'm doing that with Wave C6. And then lastly, using internal sidechain from Bass Rider to just make sure the bass is played level throughout the song, and it's set it and move on with your life. Epic. And on the main bass amp, I'm doing something also that I don't think a lot of people do with Saturn. So I am sidechaining the kick and the snare to Saturn on my bass amp. And I have these different cutoff frequencies, and all these are being modulated. Right here at the bottom, you have all these different envelopes and filters and things that you can do. I'm having all these things sidechained by the kick and the snare to affect different areas of the frequency range of these bands within my distorted bass. So I can get more saturation happening on my distorted bass tone on the kick and the snare when they're playing in the track. You can really hear the bass just comes alive when I engage this. And you can see the bottom and the top are a little bit hotter than the mids. Now let's go on to guitars. Guitars, I'm literally doing the same thing. Kick is an instance of track spacer and snare is on the same instance of Unmask. It goes in. Let's talk about what's happening on this main guitar bus. I have another instance of Trinity Shaper, and every time the snare hits, the guitars get a little bit more crunch here and here so that they kind of poke through. Now, I love doing this, especially in heavier genres of music like rock and metal, where you have like breakdowns or just like really punchy tones for like a do-do-do, and you're just like, man, that's like not sounding right. Sidechain like your snare or your kick with something like this to a transient shaper on the guitars, and just listen to how the guitars just all of a sudden sound more like pummeling with that kick and that snare movement in the track. And that's what I'm doing for this song. It's pop punk. I want a little bit more bite out of the guitars, but I don't want to EQ it. I just want the guitar tone to come through. Now, I have covered this plugin on the channel before. It is so sick because most amp sims are awesome, but they are very linear in how they work. This plugin has internal sidechaining modulation. What does that all mean? Basically, like what we saw with Saturn, all these parameters can be controlled via sidechain, via a modulator that is signaling to it, hey, within this parameter, do this particular move. In this case, I have an envelope on the bass, the mids, and the gain. Now, the reason I have it like this, and I absolutely love this plugin for it, when you have this envelope set up, you're getting this little range of where the dial can move. So essentially this bass is set to this particular instance, but you see the little white space above it. That means that it will move basically on its own. It will modulate between those sections based on the internal modulation sidechain signal that's being applied to it. I have it set for the bass, the mids, and the gain. The reason I have it for that is when you actually play guitar and you're strumming, usually the bass and the mids and the chord are going to fluctuate in how they react into the amp. And the gain also is going to fluctuate based on your pick attack. What I'm doing with this plugin is I'm using the envelope sidechain modulation to signal to the amplifier to move those parameters so it sounds more like a realistic performance, which is just a game changer in the box. So with this particular track, I was like, you know what? We're doing sidechaining. Let's go with some more internal sidechain modulation. So that same tone is across all the other instances. Now, another trick that I learned while in guitar school is a lot of people microphone direct mics into the cab and call it a day. But I saw a lot of instances where in audio school and working with Bo, you record the room as well. So you can get some ambience into those guitar tones so they're not so dry in a mix. So one of the techniques I like to do is add a reverb plugin. In this case, the UAD Ocean Way Studios is a great sounding room, and I did a video on it. I will also link that below. And then what I have happening is right underneath, because we're putting duplicated guitars through a room, what could happen is phase issues and cancellation. Anytime you have multi-mic'd sources, just like with the drums, phase and polarity become a real big thing, and they can be be really, really scary and intimidating. The whole point of this is to not make it that way so that you can get to work making cool tracks. You can just pull up an instance of Neutron Phase, send a sidechain of the guitar to the instance, in this case, Rhythm Guitar 1, Rhythm Guitar 2, hit the learn button, and it will automatically adjust the delay and rotation of the phase for you. And then you can bring those into the mix. And that is the guitars. Now let's go on to vocals, because I got some cool stuff happening on vocals. Vocal Writer, it's listening to the audio. I have it sidechained, listening to the band bus. So every time the band's playing, the vocalist is a little bit above the band bus, so I am not fighting them in the mix. It is a very, very awesome plugin. You can also use this on guitars. I didn't do it for this particular demonstration because I felt like I was doing a lot already. If you actually want to see that in a video, just comment Vocal Writer guitars or guitar Vocal Writer or something in the comments, and I will get to doing that. So the next thing I haven't really seen done before, but it's pretty sick. I have my main vocal going to this sidechain. It's an instance of Waste Factory Equalizer, which I absolutely love, and I've covered it on so many videos on the channel. This thing is a cheat code beyond cheat codes for a lot of things. I have it sidechained, and what's happening is that when the main vocal sings, this will automatically take out any of the frequencies that are in the way of the main vocal and remove them. So it acts more of like a sandwich, which is what I want with the vocal performance. Because with the vocal, it's so much more sensitive of a musical feeling. If you go too far with it, it can make the vocal sound thinner. This one has a really nice way of making it gel really nicely together. And I have the mix and I have the amount. I usually keep it at 50 as a startup there, and then I move on with my day. Let's see if we can hear that. It just sounds like there's more power to a vocal and not two vocalists. It sounds like one vocalist with more power. I have that same thing happening on this vocal double. And then I have our vocal harmonies. Now, something I like to do with vocal harmonies is with scalar EQ, I'm literally doing the same thing. I have the key of the song being sidechained by the main vocal 1 and 2, and it is removing frequencies out of key in the mid-range. So when the main vocal 1 and main vocal 2 sing, the vocal harmonies are being removed frequencies that are out of key of the song. So it still marries to what the performance is of the main vocal performance, but the frequencies that are offending are removed out. And let's take a listen.
I can't let go, I guess I'll eat alone. Pineapples on my mind, just don't waste my time.
It's really, really subtle, but man, it does make a difference when you have like a lot of vocal stacks that even when a vocal is in tune, there's frequencies that are out of key of the song, and sometimes removing those ever so slightly can really help bring things alive. Now for vocal effects, I've got another iZotope plugin that's really sick. It's a delay plugin called Cascadia, I believe. I have an 1/8 note delay, and the reason I went with this one, again, it has internal sidechaining, it has the unmask happening, so we're cleaning up frequencies at any time the main vocal hits. It's removing those frequencies, unmasking them from that effect, and then it's letting the rest flourish. And then from there, I am also using an instance of scalar EQ to catch any more frequencies in the low mids that are out of key of the song. And I'm doing the same thing on this second vocal effect. This time I have, I think, a solo delay. It's unmasking. Same thing with scalar EQ. And then I have a vocal plate with Seventh Heaven using the Ducker again. And then I have another instance of Seventh Heaven here on this delay. And then I'm using Gullfoss on the master. And what's being sidechained here is the vocal bus. It's just helping to make space from the frequencies in the vocals from the rest of the track so that the vocals really come out. Because at the end of the day, that's all anyone really cares about, is hearing the singer and the vocalist. So there's a lot of different types of sidechaining. Happening within this track. And if you download the mix decoder cheat sheet, I've included all of them in there so you can just go through and kind of remind yourself like, oh yeah, I can try this or try that. And with taking advantage of all these different ways of using sidechaining, just like the pros, you can take a rough sounding track from this
The phone keeps ringing off the hook, waiting
to this.
for your order to come in. You always said you try new things. Always said you would eat anything. I guess it's not what it seems. Nothing can take pineapple from me. I can't let go, I guess I'll eat alone. Pineapples on my mind, just don't waste my time. Sweet and salty makes the money, you probably like anchovies. I'm shouting to the sky, my pride is in this pie.
And if you also want to start releasing mixes that make people wonder how the hell you're pulling it off, grab the free mix decoder cheat sheet below. And if you think sidechaining alone is the key to giving you pro level clarity and separation, it won't. Not unless you're using the other tricks top mixers rely on before they even touch an EQ. And in this next video, I show you exactly how to steal these tricks for yourself.